Here, I'm going to show you guys how to analyze and perform calculations on dynamically sized data sets in Excel. So that means data sets where, for instance, when I hit the refresh button, I'm going to get new columns and or new rows every day. And we want our functions and our formulas to apply specifically to the last row or the last column, not just the entire data table. The examples I show you here, they are going to work if you have an actual table like this or just a regular data set where you want to paste data in, so you don't have to worry about that. Before we start, check the video description and click the link to Teach Excel so you can download the files for the tutorial and follow along. And make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials. All right, so the data set that we have here is data for the COVID-19 virus and its spread. And what I've got is a data set that can be imported just by clicking a refresh button, and it will pull in all the new daily data. This is for confirmed cases around the world and the territories and the regions that they're in within the countries as well. I made 2 tutorials on this last week, so if you want to know how to get this data into Excel and have it update nice and neat just by clicking the refresh button, check those tutorials because I'm not going to talk about that at all today. The point is that when we refresh the data, when we pull it in here, I'm all the way to the right of the data set now, we get new daily data, which comes in as new columns. And getting new columns is what kind of makes our calculations a little bit tricky. It's used to dealing with new rows. We can deal with new rows very easily just by referencing the column in the data table, and then our formulas don't change. But it's when we have to add a new column that things get a little bit tricky. So what we're going to do here is create a type of dashboard like this, and this is another way to analyze this data. Last week I showed you a pivot table and how to add a chart on top of that, and this is another way to do it if you just want to pull out little pieces and slice and dice it different ways and have it update automatically. So what we're going to do is allow you to input a country here, see how many cases there were yesterday confirmed, today, and the change. And every time that we hit refresh on this data table here, this will automatically update. You don't have to hit refresh over here or do anything like that. And we want our formulas to update automatically as well. Then also I put world count and percent change from yesterday for the world count on there. So this is what we're going to create. And in order to do this, we're going to combine a few different functions. Now there are a million different ways to do this, but I'm going to try and give you guys a simple way that'll work for every type of data set and hopefully easy to remember. So let's deal with the concept before we go into the formulas. The concept of it is to know which rows and which columns to get, basically. So we want to reference the last column, right? So we need to know where the last column is. What is an easy way to find out where the last column is? We'll count how many columns have data in them. So we find a row that we know will always have a value in it. In this case, it is our header row. You can see there is a value in every column here, and there always will be. And we can count how many headers there are. That's going to tell us how many columns there are. Then we need to do the same thing with the number of rows. So we find a column that will always have a value for every row. In this case, it is country and region. And we can use this to count how many rows have data in them. Now this does assume that there is no data below the table and no data to the right of the table. So we have a worksheet here that only has the data that we want on it. Nothing else, no additional data, raw data right here. So let us go to the dashboard and let's do that first. And we'll build these functions piece by piece. Let us get our first count. We are going to use the count A function. Counts the number of cells in a range that are not empty. We don't care if it's text or numbers, we just want it to be not empty. So count A, then let's go over here to our imported data and let's click row 1 that has our headers and hit enter. So now we know that we have 61 columns of data. Let's do the same thing to get the rows, imported data, country, region. And here you actually could just choose the column in the data table itself if your data is formatted like a table. But I'm going to make this a more generic tutorial. So we're just going to select the entire column, then hit enter. Now we know that we have 463 rows of data. Now what we can do is to combine this with an amazing function that you really have to learn. It's going to be a kind of a pain at first, but the offset function. Let's zoom in a little bit here and do the offset function. The offset function equals offset. Let's see what it says here. Returns a reference to a range that is a given number of rows and columns from a given reference. Okay, basically, the offset function allows you to create a range. That's all. So we're going to build a range here. So here we have offset. Now we need to give it a reference. We're going to build a range. Well, where do we want it to start? Let's go over here, and we can choose A2. So we're going to choose the leftmost column in the data set and the first cell below the headers. So if we were to go to the last column and click it, we would click here in row 2 and drag down. So that's why we're choosing 2 in this case. Now let's do a comma. And we're now on the second argument. So let's go back to the dashboard tab. And what we want to do here is how many rows. That's the next argument. So how many rows down do we want to go from our current reference? Well, I don't want to go any rows down from A2. We want the reference for our range to be in row 2. So this argument says how many rows down or up do you want to be from the one you just selected. And you could put nothing there, but I'm just going to go ahead and put 0, maybe make it a little bit more clear. Then comma, how many columns do you want to be, to the right or to the left of your reference? Well, we want to go a bunch of columns to the right. In fact, we want to go up to column 61. So let's choose 61. But we don't want to go to column 62. So this will put it 61 columns to the right, which would make it column 62. So I will put -1 so that it will be on column 61 because we start in column 1. So 1 plus 61 is 62. Comma. Now how big do we want this to be? Well, we want this to be 463 cells high. But remember that that includes the header row. So we want to subtract 1 to get the header row out of there. Now the last argument is the width. That's also an optional argument. We do not need to put that in there. So let's close the parentheses. And in later versions of Excel, when I go ahead and hit enter, what it's going to do now is to fill in all of the results from the range. So when I hit enter and it fills in all the cells, don't worry, there's just one formula here. Excel just wants to, I don't know, be flashy in the later versions. So enter, and there we go. So if I go over to the imported data worksheet, I should see 212 at the top in the very last column, then 889, 313. So let us see that. 212, 889, 313, 1. So what we've done is we have effectively pulled in from here down the very last column. And we can go down to make sure we got the right one. 3 ones and a 2. And let's go down. 3 ones and a 2. So we make sure that everything lines up perfectly. And now what we've done is successfully created a range reference that references the last column of our dynamic data set, regardless of how many columns it has and regardless of how many rows it has. So let's move on to the next thing. Now we have our range reference, and it looks like this. And if we wanted to, what we can do now that we have this big dude is we can start to combine it into one formula. So let's put it up here. Okay, now let's get the blue dude, copy him. And this is really how you want to create your big formulas so that you do not make any mistakes. And we'll take this guy and we will paste him in right here. All right, so now we're getting quite a gnarly formula. Now let us copy this. Okay. Now let's go ahead and get today's data. So since our data is not just broken up by country, but broken up by regions within the countries, we aren't going to be using the VLOOKUP function here. So you could use a VLOOKUP if you wanted to, and use similar techniques to what I'm showing you to get this formula to work. but what we want is the sum if function. And I'm going to keep it simple with the sum if. You could use sum ifs if you wanted. And what we have here, very simple, is a range, a criteria, and a sum range. So the range is going to be the list of country names, the list of countries, and the criteria is going to be what we input right here. So for the range, we go to our raw data set over here, and we go over here to country region, and what we could do is this to select the entire column, or just go like this to select something within the data table itself. You can see that the format looks a little bit different. Now, whichever one you choose, if you're going to select the entire column or just the region within the data table, it depends on your data set. In this case, our range where we're going to be summing the data will be from this row, row 2, all the way down to the end of the data table. So, as a result, we are not going to be choosing the entire column, otherwise it will not line up correctly because it will then include the header row. So what I'm going to do here is just click the first row in this column, Control Shift down to select all of it. Then we're going to get the structured references up here, so the name of the data table, and then the name of this column. Then I'll do a comma. Then we'll go back to dashboard. Then we're going to select A4 for criteria. That's what we use to say I want to sum this data or that data. Then comma. Now we're on the sum range. For the sum range, it's what we just did down here to get all of this data from the last column. So I'm just going to paste in that offset function, remove the equal sign, cross your fingers, hit enter. Looks like we got a little error. Do I want to accept the correction? I just need to put one more parentheses on the outside. I forgot to do that. So yes, put the additional parentheses on. Thank you. And 568. So we got the correct number. It's not the number that was there just a moment ago because I copy pasted this from the finished product, and the numbers today are different than the numbers that are there now in this worksheet, which you'll see when I hit refresh at the end of the tutorial. So now we have today's numbers, the most recent numbers from the last column for Australia. And if I, let's see, hit Austria, you would see that this changes. So this is really how you do it. And yes, it looks kind of terrifying, but if you assemble this piecemeal like I just did, little bit by little bit, and try to remember the logic of it, then it's not that difficult. Also, if you want, you can shorten the name of your table, and that will make this much smaller, so the formula will look at least a little bit less intimidating. So now that I've explained the formula, what I'm going to do is go ahead and just pop in the rest of the formulas for this. So we have today's data. Let's put it back to Australia. And let us go ahead and get yesterday's data. So for yesterday's data, we have to make a little change. Today's data is the last column. Yesterday will be the second to last column. So what we need to do is to change our offset function. So maybe what I will do is go down here. This is our big offset function. Let's go ahead and create another one right here. And let's back up that column reference by 1. So if you don't remember how to do that, just click right here inside the opening parentheses for offset. Tells you what the arguments are. We don't want the reference argument or the rows, but we do want the column. So we need the third argument. Click around in the function, around the commas, and once you see the column argument highlighted, you're in the correct place. So you can see we already subtract 1 to back it up by 1. Now we want to subtract one more. What you could do is -2. A lot of people do that. But I do think it's kind of a bit more easy if I just add another -1. Because that tells me that there are two things causing me to -1. And I find that that kind of logically helps me to remember that two things are going on here if I look at the formula in the future. So do -2 or -1, -1, however you want. and it's going to pull in data from the previous day, 177, 878. Let us verify this. Okay. 177, 878, perfect. So now let's just adapt the yesterday's formula. Down here, -1, -1. It's now the same as the other offset, and we get 452. Then we're going to do a percent change from yesterday. So that's a pretty easy formula now that we have everything split out, although you could put it all in one cell if you wanted to. So we'll do equals, open parentheses, today minus yesterday divided by yesterday. Enter. Format it as a percent, so home tab percent, add some decimal places, and there you go. For the world, it's just a little bit different. So instead of the SUMIF function, we just want to use the sum function. But we still do want to deal with the very last column. So I will copy this dude. And the number you're about to see will not be the same as this until we refresh the data. So equals sum. Paste that dude in there. Cross your fingers. Do the last parentheses. Hope it works. Looks like it worked. And now we do the percent change. Here we're going to be doing everything in one cell. Let's see if I can manage it the first time. So equals. We want today's data minus yesterday's data, which requires 2 -1s. Okay, I'm doing this a bit of a funky way. Divided by yesterday's data. Okay, now I need to surround these dudes with sum. This is why it is much nicer to have everything broken out. It's much easier to see. All right, now we have a big, nasty formula. Let's see if this guy works. Looks like it works. All right. Now what I'm going to do, before I forget, is to highlight the cells that have formulas in them here and maybe pull them down a little bit. Get them out of the way, but leave them in here as reference. Okay. And now we should have a working dashboard that works on the very last column of our data. So let us go to the imported data tab, and you can see now that we have March 18th. Let's go ahead, table design, and refresh, see if we get the new data. Okay, looks good, looks good. So now we can see 599, 411. Let's go on the dashboard. 599, 599, 411, and all of these numbers have updated. So now all you have to do is hit one refresh button on one page, and your dashboard is going to update however you want it to update with all the data that you want based off of the new data, the last column, all the rows that are in there, everything that just gets pulled into Excel. So essentially all we're doing here, all you really need to learn, maybe I should have just called this the offset tutorial, is how to use this offset function right here. And of course you can make this as snazzy or as visual as you'd like it to, put as many charts as you want, add more countries, you can do rankings, you can add helper columns to do all sorts of cool stuff, or array functions. You can do a million more things. It's really, the sky's the limit here, but as this tutorial is already way too long, I think I'm going to go ahead and cut it off here. And I hope that this has been a helpful tutorial. If you're not really sure where I got the data for this tutorial, please watch the previous two ones on importing the coronavirus COVID-19 stats into Excel. It's pretty interesting how we can import them, and just with now 2 clicks, a refresh on the imported data and the pivot table, you get all the data refreshed into Excel so that you can work with it, visualize it, and analyze it however you want. But as far as using the offset and getting data from the very last column of a data set is concerned, that's all there is for this tutorial, and I hope you found it helpful. I hope you liked the tutorial. If it was helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials.